The courtroom felt excessively illuminated. That was my initial observation. The shine reflecting from the glossy floors, the manner in which it rebounded off the light-colored walls and glinted on the bronze of the judge's nameplate. I straightened my jacket, continued advancing. Ellis rotated his head upon spotting me. The grin emerged gradually as if he'd rehearsed it. Dana inclined toward him, murmured something concealed by her palm, and chuckled excessively loud. Her bangle tinkled against the surface as she folded her arms. Her fingernails were crimson. Invariably crimson. I avoided gazing at them. The bailiff announced my name, Nora Kalin, the responding individual. My high heels resonated as I neared the defendant's bench. I took my seat, adjusted the edge of my dress, and interlaced my fingers on my knees. I didn't require viewing Ellis's countenance to recognize his pleasure in this. The judge leafed through the dossier. His gaze scanned the initial page, then the following. He halted, examined once more. Hold on. He directed his eyes toward the plaintiff's attorney. She's the person you're pursuing legally. The atmosphere altered. Even the court secretary ceased typing. He reclined in his seat, eyelids narrowing subtly. I've reviewed the affidavit. Assertions of reduced mental ability, improper handling of estate properties. Possible requirement for guardianship. He pivoted to me. Mrs. Cullen, what is your age? 66, Your Honor. And do you presently reside by yourself? Indeed. Working, pensioned, financial examiner, municipal accounting division, 32 years. He assented gradually, recorded. Dana's expression had frozen. Ellis fidgeted in his chair, tweaking his sleeves as though they'd become constrictive. The judge rapped his writing instrument twice. Let's advance with today's initial assessment, but I wish to examine the corroborating proof for these accusations. Every bit of it. He stated it without malice, yet it was the sort of tone that dismantled acts. I refrained from grinning. I refrained from blinking. Behind me, an individual flipped open a notepad. The noise scraped through the quietude. I observed the periphery of Dana's demeanor as she bent toward their counsel. Her lips shifted, but I didn't require hearing the terms. They'd readied for an alternate portrayal of me, and I hadn't yet unsealed my portfolio. The inaugural correspondence arrived creased in a pristine envelope, bearing my name typed in neat, businesslike font. No sender's details, merely the title of a legal practice I didn't know. I unsealed it in the cooking area, placing my beverage aside to peruse. It commenced with courtesies. Dear Mrs. Kalin, we act on behalf of Mr. Ellis Callan regarding familial monetary issues. Somzim, my beverage aside. My sight glided over lawful expressions I'd encountered countless times during my tenure with the municipality. Except now, I wasn't at the counter. I was the objective. They demanded paperwork, income declarations, fiduciary particulars. The missive concluded with a mild admonition. Our patron voices worry about your competence to oversee continuing economic duties. I remained awake that evening. The subsequent correspondence appeared 7 days later. Harsher inflection referenced habits of disorientation. Proposed an appraisal. I positioned myself at my workstation and re-examined the beginning sentence until it smudged. I had preserved Ellis's infant footwear in the uppermost compartment of that workstation for ages. I pulled open the compartment and brushed them as if they could anchor me. By the tertiary correspondence, I wasn't astonished, merely weary. This included a preliminary appeal. Guardianship advised I was deficient in ability to manage intricate dealings. Ellis's designation featured prominently appellant Ellis James Kalin. He hadn't phoned, not a single time, not even a text. I positioned myself at the dining table and surveyed the residence I'd cleared with overtime and unspoken devotion. I recalled the expression on his face when I presented him the initial payment for his debut dwelling. I recalled assisting Dana select floral arrangements for their nuptials, even when she never sought my input. Now he sought to assert I couldn't distinguish a financial statement from a shopping inventory. I lifted my telephone. I didn't contact Ellis. I dialed Martin, the property lawyer who aided establishing the fiduciary after Harold passed. He answered on the second tone. Nora. I informed him of what I'd gotten. There was a lull. Let's convene, he stated. Bring all items. Thus, I unsealed the compartment, extracted the missives and the register I hadn't revealed to anybody in 25 years. He used to perch on the veranda each dusk just prior to 6, observing the road for Harold's vehicle. Occasionally, he'd doze off, nestled on the swing, tome in his grasp, cranium on a cushion I maintained by the entrance solely for him. The veranda illumination remained activated until I ultimately transported him into R.S. Harold departed on a Tuesday dawn. I recall the telephone sounding, the attendant stating, severe and abrupt. I recall the noise of Ellis's breakfast dish striking the ground when I released the receiver. He was 7. I didn't weep before him. That period, I disposed of Harold's automobile. I secured an evening position at the medical center performing admissions. I retained my daytime municipal role. I ceased purchasing citrus beverage. I trimmed my locks brief because I lacked moments to style it before labor. I vended the wedding band for 50% of its value and settled our service arrears. I didn't return to worship for 3 years. Sunday dawns transformed into provision acquisitions and meal preparations for the period. When Ellis reached 10, I accumulated sufficient to dispatch him to a scientific retreat he'd perused in the rear of a periodical. I prepared fish salads for myself for supper, 5 evenings consecutively to achieve it. When he was 16, I forwarded my annual health check so I could acquire him attire for a traineeship at a monetary company in the city center. He resembled Harold that day, upright and grave, positioned before the corridor reflector, tweaking his neckwear, Nintier. When he received his university admission notice, I visited 3 separate lenders to assemble a personal credit in my designation. I didn't desire him commencing his existence beneath the burden of figures. I observed him traverse the platform at commencement and pondered. I accomplished it. I accomplished sufficient. And now that lad, that attire donning, neckwear adjusting, veranda awaiting lad is in tribunal attempting to demonstrate I can't be relied upon. I compressed the portfolio shut and propelled it across Martin's counter. He regarded me, then at the casing atop. Dana's grin never fully arrived at her sights. It was taut at the edges, rehearsed like a marketing presentation. I'd witnessed it frequently at the practice meal at Ellis's celebration previous year, even when she delivered that purchased dessert and urged I relax from preparing. Courtesy enveloped in sweetness. 3 months prior, she'd visited on a Sunday dawn, stated she wished to aid me arrange items, render everything electronic in event of crisis. Just in case anything ever occurred. It's what my guardians are doing, too. I didn't desire her rummaging my archives, but Ellis had recently delivered some provisions, and I didn't wish to appear unthankful. So I assented, informed her she could duplicate, nothing source. She positioned at my workstation for almost 2 hours. When I returned with infusion, she had already tagged half the directories. You truly retain everything, she remarked. I grinned, then uncertain if it was praise or not. Periods elapsed. I accessed my financial institution profile and observed notifications I hadn't established. A fresh user account had been appended. I altered the code, marked it. The institution phoned to verify and revision to my authority of counsel. I informed them I never presented one. They messaged me a digitized duplicate. It bore my designation, my location, my permit front and reverse. The autograph resembled mine, but inclined incorrectly. The curve on the R was firmer, the foundation irregular. It was a variant of my designation I hadn't penned. I positioned there, grasping the hard copy in my palms, recognizing precisely how they'd accomplished it. Dana had grinned when she departed that day. Stated she'd preserved everything to a portable storage and would dispatch me a duplicate. She never did. I entered the auxiliary chamber where I stored the flame-resistant container. I unsealed it gradually. Travel document, titles, health instructions. The sources were all present, but the fiduciary paper was disordered. The separator labeled lawful had been relocated. One sheet was absent. I knew which prior to even inspecting. After Harold departed, I released much. The waterfront asset went initially too costly to upkeep, too distant to access alone. Then, investments we'd accumulated via his former company. I liquidated them, discreetly utilized portion of the funds to establish a reserve account in Ellis's designation for university, even though he didn't know yet. I disposed of the additional vehicle, reduced the coverage, simplified existence to what I could manage solo, but I retained the residence. Even when I had to remortgage it a decade ago to assist Ellis and Dana acquire theirs, I never altered the designation on the title. Never included anyone, never lent more than I could repay. I allowed the cooking area to become antiquated. I repaired the covering myself one warm season when the builder's estimate seemed more like a fence than help. I coexisted with the groans in the planks and the breeze in the visitor chamber because it still scented like Harold's garments and knees. It was the sole location where every devotion resided silently adjacent to me. So when I turned to the Ultima T-sheet of the appeal and saw the phrase about disposal of mutually affected asset for fair reallocation, my respiration halted. They intended the residence. Dana must have guided the wording. That was her method, employing courteous, lawful haze to conceal viciousness. Martin noticed my countenance as I placed the paper down. "We'll counter," he stated softly but resolute. "You're the exclusive owner. Their position won't sustain." I assented, but I couldn't quite vocalize because it wasn't merely about ownership or regulation. It was about recollection. About dawns in that cooking area prior to education. About Harold's soiled footwear by the rear entrance. About Ellis mastering to cycle down the path, the identical one they now wished to value segment and bend. They could seize documents, attempt to rewrite purpose. But this residence, this was the final item that hadn't been affected until now. Martin passed me a writing tool and indicated to the area where we'd need to enumerate properties for protection. I began with the residence. Then I halted and inscribed a second phrase. The subsequent session progressed rapidly. Proposals, displays, objections recorded for future examination. I maintained my palms steady, my posture erect. I avoided gazing at Ellis or Dana. Their counsel communicated in cautious inflections, employing terms like worry, household purpose, cross-generational shift. I bided. When it was my lawyer's opportunity to reply, he rose and declared, "We retain complete refutation for trial, Your Honor, but we'd like to highlight several discrepancies in the appeal and petition a confidential meeting concerning the respondent's safeguarded papers." Judge Lansing glanced upward. Safeguarded how health and economic both linked to papers purportedly presented without approval. There was a lull. Then Judge Lansing adjusted his seat, inclined a head subtly. "Mrs. Kalin, you labored in municipal accounting, didn't you?" "Indeed, Your Honor." 32 years. He assented gradually. "Your spouse, Harold Kalin, he expired from heart failure in 99. My larynx constricted, but I maintained my tone firm. Indeed, I recall him." Lansing stated, "You attended Inheritance Tribunal. I was assisting under Judge Riley. Then your offspring was with you." He shaded spacecraft in the borders of the submission sheets. I heard Ellis fidget behind me. Judge Lansing directed his gaze down at the appeal again. "Let's pause briefly. Attorneys for both sides' chambers, please." Ellis rose too swiftly, dislodging his writing tool from the surface. Dana contacted his forearm, whispered something. She still avoided looking at me. In the corridor beyond the room, I positioned beside Martin while the others entered. The entrance snapped closed behind us. Judge Lansing gestured to the compact meeting surface. "Huss. I'm not here to rear a household's feelings," he stated, "but I recall this lady, and I recall the manner she discussed safeguarding her offspring. I'd like to understand why that identical offspring is now doubting her ability with a falsified autograph and a dubious authority of counsel." Martin unsealed the dossier. He didn't communicate. He merely arranged the papers one by one. The video captured the institution alerts. The authenticated missive from my physician dated 1 week prior to Ellis's. When we re-entered the tribunal, the bailiff passed the judge a portfolio. He didn't unseal it yet. He merely regarded Ellis. I had preserved that portfolio for years, never imagining I'd require it. It commenced modestly, just a routine from my years in accounting. Every invoice, every report, every communication recorded and time-stamped. Harold used to jest me for it. "You've got a directory for every inhalation we make," he'd remark. And I'd grin because maintaining archives was how I remained composed when existence didn't offer retries. After he expired, the routine intensified. Order became my solace. Paper revealed the reality when individuals couldn't. When Judge Lansing inquired about confirmation, I didn't waver. I informed Martin where to search. Lowest compartment, secured cupboard, right flank of the workspace. He motored to the residence that evening. The portfolio wasn't elaborate, just a azure binder with flaking tacks. Inside were 20 years of silent evidence, revenue submissions, exchanges, authenticated missives, even the minor items that didn't count until abruptly they did. Near the rear, 3 sheets were fastened together, my latest health sworn statement signed by Dr. Patel, timestamped 3 weeks prior to the purported assessment Ellis presented. The pigment was still vivid, the autograph aligned. Beneath that, a portable drive adhered to the binder's backbone. I'd nearly overlooked it. The modest resident surveillance I'd set up after an intrusion 5 years prior had recorded Dana outputting something in my workspace while I tended the yard. I hadn't realized she'd utilized my own device. When Martin activated it on his portable, Teed Atticus portable, recording was fuzzy, but distinct. Dana, bending ahead, telephone in one palm, my identification on the duplicator surface. She grinned at something. The individual on the communication stated, "Yes, I'll obtain it today," she murmured. Martin duplicated everything, positioned the binder in a closed casing, and passed it to the bailiff the following dawn. In tribunal, when Judge Lansing requested proof of deception, Martin merely stated, "We possess more than sufficient." The judge elevated an eyebrow. Then I propose we advance cautiously. Ellis regarded his counsel. Dana regarded the ground. I interlaced my palms on the surface and bided for the noise that would accompany the instant reality ultimately struck paper. Ellis tweaked his coat prior to advancing to the testimony platform. He avoided looking at me. He maintained his sights on the ground, then the judge, then the upper wall, anywhere but me. When he was affirmed, his tone emerged gentler than I recalled. Discussed worry about observing habits, how I had begun misplacing where items were. He referenced a payment I'd issued twice in one period, a voice message I purportedly left where I mixed a timestamp. He uttered it all like it pained him to utter it, like he'd wrestled with the choice to bring this to tribunal. Martin didn't interject. He merely bided. When it was time for questioning, he rose gradually and extracted the binder from his case. "Mr. Hohen," he stated, "can you verify your autograph appears on these submissions?" Ellis glanced across. "Yes, across. And can you verify that you presented these health worries to the tribunal based on an assessment by Dr. Levin?" "Yes," Martin assented. "Fascinating." Then he moved aside and the display behind him illuminated. First, the sworn statement from Dr. Patel materialized, authenticated, time-stamped before Dr. Levin's document, clearly asserting I was of stable intellect and entirely able to manage economic affairs. Then came the time-marked recording Dana at my workstation, duplicating my identification. I saw Ellis's mandible firm. Then Martin displayed the entry record from my institution account, noting the abnormal access on the day Dana came followed by an unapproved profile alteration. Judge Lansing reclined in his seat, forearms on the supports. He didn't communicate, but the quietude was more severe than yelling. Dana's palm shifted under the surface. Her counsel bent in, murmuring. The secretary murmured to the bailiff. Ellis parted his lips, but no terms emerged. The facade was crumbling. Judge Lansing ultimately shattered the calm. "We'll continue tomorrow dawn," he stated. "Attorneys, please stay after adjournment." Ellis descended from the platform, his palms gripped. He passed me without a look. Dana trailed slower, as if her footwear didn't align anymore. I stayed positioned, observing them advance toward the exits. The decision arrived swiftly. Judge Lansing didn't extend it. He outlined the realities, the inconsistencies, the proof of tampering. He highlighted the falsified autograph and the monitoring recording. He never elevated his tone. He didn't need to. "The tribunal determines no foundation for the appeal," he stated clearly. "All assertions are rejected with finality. No compensations are granted. Additionally, this tribunal advises examination of materials presented by the appellants for possible deception." Martin assented beside me. I didn't shift to Nessa. When the hammer dropped, it didn't resound. It merely settled like a concluding exhalation that had required weeks to inhale. Outside, the sunlight had moved across the area. My legs ached, but I continued advancing. Mom Ellis summoned behind me, not boisterously, more like an instinct, as if he still thought I might rotate out of routine. "I didn't. Can we converse?" he inquired. Dana positioned beside him, limbs crossed, sights on the pavement. She uttered nothing. I passed them without halting. Martin didn't communicate either. He allowed the quietude to retain its form. Ellis didn't pursue. I don't believe he knew what to utter once the lines exhausted. At the vehicle, I positioned my satchel in the rear seat and positioned carefully, palms on my knees. For an instant, I merely inhaled. I sensed the borders of my designation resolve back into my flesh like it had been borrowed to another for too extended. The residence was still mine. The fiduciary endured, and the archive portfolio that had once seemed like a load now positioned beside me like a guard I hadn't known I'd require. Martin entered the operator's seat. "You wish to return to your location?" he inquired. I gazed directly forward. "No," I stated. Not yet. I wasn't prepared to return to the identical barriers just yet. Not before I comprehended how to exist in them again, without anticipating the ground to collapse. And nonsense. He assented, activated the motor. We motored for a period without communicating, curving through roads that seemed known and serene. By the moment I wreck. You stood him to stop. The illumination had altered. Periods elapsed before I unsealed the entrance to the workspace again. I commenced with the exterior, aged casings, tribunal outlines, the pile of reproductions Martin had restored after the decision. I destroyed what no longer aided a function, containerized the remainder for keeping. The sole item I didn't contact was the lowest compartment. It required me 2 days to unseal it. Inside was the aged register navy covering frayed thin at the borders, backbone still whole. I'd initiated it after Harold passed when Ellis was in 3rd level. It wasn't for revenues or planning. It was for the items that didn't appear on documents. Sheet after sheet, music instructions, excursion charges, co-payments, festive travel passes, lines for provisions when Ellis was in advanced studies, payments dispatched just because on celebrations when I guessed they were limited on lease but too dignified to inquire. There was the $27,000 I moved when Dana forfeited her position, and they didn't inform anyone. The $5,000 I transmitted the day prior to their loan sealed because an institution postponement nearly cost them the residence. It was all present. Every devotion, every affirmation, that expense more than I confessed aloud. I didn't preserve it for a claim. I preserved it because figures were truthful. They didn't distort the narrative or overlook the specifics. I sealed the register without appending a concluding notation. Nothing about the appeal, nothing about the session. Some items didn't require payment to be recalled. The telephone sounded late one midday while I was transplanting the flora in the nook. Unidentified digit. I allowed it to voicemail. No communication left. Perhaps it was insignificant. Perhaps it was someone recognizing too delayed what quietude signifies when it's selected, not forced. I positioned the register back into the compartment. Not secured, but sealed. The residence was serene again. Not empty, just serene. And somewhere in that serenity, I started to trust I could exist in it without glancing rear every time I traversed the corridor.